Warhammer 40k Darktide has seen an immense surge in new players, launching it into the prestigious position as the most played Warhammer 40k game according to public data. But any Tide veteran who's been around for a while knows that this is typically what happens when Darktide gets a big update. There's a big surge of new and returning players, and we typically see a spike in the player base. This is then quickly followed by a departure in players once people realize that this isn't really that kind of live service game that feeds content to the player base every month or even 2 months. This is a very seasonal game where content gets released every quarter or so. I believe that the developers of Darktide, Fatshark, are very content with the state of Darktide as it stands. So you're not going to see any sudden movements on their part or any changes to their team or how they work. The game isn't suddenly going to switch to a faster-paced live service model where content is releasing every month. Nevertheless, no matter how we as a community feel about Darktide, Darktide can be the best 40k game out there in our eyes. Player retention is very important. Typically, this affects the game in 3 major areas: the new player experience, Mortis Trials, and the newly released expeditions. Whenever there's a dry spell for Darktide, typically things like Auric, the mission board, Auric Maelstrom, or even Havocs aren't really affected because dedicated players who are dedicated to playing this game day in and day out typically won't leave the game during these dry spells. It's typically newer players and more casual players who depart the game first. Unfortunately, these players also tend to stick to the mission board or Havoc because there's no reason, incentive, need, or even want to go do things like expeditions, Mortis Trials, or help ferry new players through the new player experience. Now, there are things that we want to see Fatshark do, such as add new maps, add new enemies, add a new faction such as Gene Stealers, and potentially with all of that add a completely new campaign that expands the story. But in this video, I'd like to provide direct feedback on the new player experience, expeditions, and Mortis Trials, and provide simple and actionable solutions on all 3 of these very important pillars of the game, with the goal of making every facet of the game interesting and creating more reasons for players to want to log in every day. I can't remember who said this on the internet, but they're looking for a game that they want to absolutely get addicted to and waste their entire life on. They want a game to destroy their life. Now, with that being said, a video like this doesn't really go anywhere unless it starts a discussion of some kind. So I'd appreciate you liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and commenting your thoughts below and contributing to this conversation, because that is really all I'm trying to start or have here, is simply a conversation and an open forum with the developers. So let's start off with what I think would be the easiest thing to update, which would be Mortis Trials. Mortis Trials is a survival horde mode with roguelike elements in that you select randomized modifiers that will improve your class as the game progresses. As it stands, there's nothing inherently wrong with the game mode, but there are 3 things that can be improved to enhance quality of life and keep players returning to the game mode. My first suggestion is that the amount of difficulties should be trimmed down to just 2, Heresy and Auric. The developers have actually experimented with this in Expeditions by taking the game's 5 base difficulties and trimming them down to just 4 for Expeditions. I believe that this needs to be taken a step further and be trimmed down to just 2 difficulties, with Heresy being the more casual difficulty and then Auric being the more hardcore difficulty. This serves the purpose of consolidating the community of both of these game modes and creating a sense of liveliness in them. The second thing that needs to be addressed with Mortis Trials is the pacing or the tempo. With the exception of the conclusions of waves 3, 6, and 9, which give you around 15 seconds to choose a buff, every other wave should have an instantaneous turnaround. This likens the pacing of the game mode to the base game or the mission board. It makes the Mortis Trial feel like an actual mission. I understand that the intermissions between each wave is a good opportunity to introduce more story and background for the various characters and NPCs of Darktide, but many of us are already used to playing the game, dealing with specials, dealing with other sound cues while NPCs are talking and interacting with us in missions. The game doesn't need to pause for us to receive some kind of lore exposition. Plus, if we don't hear what the NPC says, we can listen to it later in this Icanium. That's why you added that feature. The last thing that can be done for Mortis Trials to help maintain long-term interest in the game mode and enhance its roguelite replayability is to allow players to keep 2 different buffs from their previous run. One of these buffs would be the major buff that they pick from waves 3, 6, or 9, which tend to be more class related, and then another one would be one of the automatic buffs that they receive from any one of the other waves. This allows a little bit of playing around and mixing of each of the indulgences that the players are able to choose at the beginning of every Mortis Trial. And outside of creating a reward structure unique to Mortis Trials, this provides a gameplay reason to come back to the game mode. So in my proposed version of Mortis Trials, not much changes. Players are still able to fulfill a power fantasy in a wave-based horde game mode, but it's a little bit faster paced and they're able to enhance that power fantasy with a little bit more choice. Next up is Expeditions, which is Darktide's extraction-based game mode. In many extraction-based games, typically the excitement behind extracting is extracting with resources that you're going to use for something, and I believe that Fatshark already has a plan for Tech Remnants in Darktide. But as of the posting of this video, Tech Remnants exist to pursue cosmetics and penances. As I suggested with Mortis Trials, there are going to be 3 things that I suggest for Expeditions that I feel would be easy fixes on the back end that would go a long way for the game mode in the long end. The first fix is, of course, to just narrow the game down to 2 difficulties, Heresy and Auric, for a lot of the same reasons why I recommend that Mortis Trials be narrowed down to 2 difficulties. My second and third suggestions kind of go hand in hand in that the amount of tech remnants that you get from Auric should be significantly higher than the amount of tech remnants that you get in Heresy, and the ways that you get them should also be made much more difficult or challenging. Additionally, giving players a kind of superficial reason to farm tech remnants, such as creating a global leaderboard, would boost engagement in the activity because people would want to be in that #1 spot. In a sense, this is creating friendly competition between players, and the amount of tech remnants grinded by each player globally can be reset whenever you have a Havoc refresh. The second half of this would be to increase player engagement in the Auric difficulty of Expeditions. Currently, Expeditions are balanced in a way where the game doesn't really send any bosses, waves of specials, or hordes at you until you start running out of time, or until you reach the later scavenge zones. In Auric, this intensity should be dialed up as soon as you enter an expedition. Most of the patrols around the map in the first scavenge zone should be accompanied by a boss. And just like how the Packmaster was introduced to the base game, the Lieutenants or the Karnak Twins should be introduced to Auric Expeditions as well. Additionally, Demon Hosts can be ported over from the base game, and they can be implemented into both the Heresy and Auric variants of what I'm proposing Expeditions should be. In Heresy, it should be normal to encounter 1 demon host on a site of interest in the 3rd scavenge zone of a run, while in Auric, there should be 1 demon host on a site of interest randomly placed throughout the map on each scavenge zone of a run. This would give your more casual players the exciting choice of being able to fight that demon host and be able to extract with more tech remnants, being that they're able to get the tech remnants from the demon host itself, which you can make drop 250 to 500, and from the site of interest that it's placed directly on. For your more hardcore or dedicated players, this would shape build and run variety as different teams seek to collect as many tech remnants as they possibly can, or skip those sites of interest in order to be able to complete the run as fast as they can. This would create a pseudo endgame for players who are looking for alternatives outside of Havoc, where they're able to run their character at their power level instead of being nerfed in the Havoc environment, while creating opportunities for them to express skill in expeditions that are significantly harder than they are now. Once again, this would accomplish the goal of keeping players engaged with the game mode without adding another reward system to the game mode. Even though I'm pretty sure that tech remnants are going to be used to upgrade our weapons to basically what's the equivalent of veteran tier from Vermintide 2, where our stats get maxed from 80% all the way up to 100% for every stat category. I know that's probably the plan, but it's just a little boring. Finally, let's talk about the new player experience, which I think is the most important and fundamental pillar of Darktide. It's what holds the entire game together. If you don't already know, Fatshark has done things to help ease players along in their new player journey. For example, with the very first mission of the game, or specifically the first mission in the Battle for Tertium campaign, they actually removed the shield or barrier from the captain that you fight in the finale of that mission. To that end, I only have one suggestion that would help new players along tremendously, and it's something that already exists in the game, specifically when it comes to expeditions. When you go up to expeditions, you could press Q on the PC, which will bring you to a tutorial of expeditions that explain the basics, what a dead side run is, what extracting is, what opposition you'll face, navigation, like how it's done, what dead side or sanctuaries are, and it points out a few things on the expedition map. This kind of tutorial should be available at every game mode and at every NPC in the game. This would teach players how to engage with these game modes and with these NPCs. Plus, as an added bonus, you'd be able to explain things like weapon strength, cleave, impact, etc, etc, etc. This would be the perfect place to educate new players on all of these adjectives and verbs so that they're better prepared to deal with the game, with the actual game itself. They don't need to go to an external source in order to learn about the game. I mean, I enjoy the YouTube traffic to a lot of my guide videos, but I also understand that the majority of the actual players who are playing and engaging with Darktide don't look at any other form of media surrounding the game. Whenever a player is having a hard time with the game, there should be an inquisitive draw to learn more about the game, and the best way to deliver that information should be from within the game itself. So to recap, Darktide is indeed the most played Warhammer 40k game for now, and there are some slight content additions that the developers can make for the Mortis Trials and Expeditions game modes and the new player experience that will go a long way in helping to retain this massive player base. Like I said at the beginning of this video, we as a community want more classes, we want more maps, we want more enemies, we want more factions, we want more story, but we also want to see things that are already in the game get fixed as well, such as things like bugs, these two game modes, the entire new player experience. None of it should be ignored. Please feel free to agree or disagree with me in the comments down below. This has been Jefficus. Huge shout out to all of my subscribers and members. Thank you for your viewership. The Emperor protects.